Humanity had grown up hearing terrifying stories about a species far beyond the reaches of their explored galaxy. Scientists, explorers, and governments had warned everyone about them for decades. They were said to be ruthless, violent, and unstoppable. Stories told of entire colonies being wiped out in the blink of an eye, of planets disappearing under their advanced weapons, and of people being captured and never seen again. Many assumed these tales were true because no one had returned to tell otherwise. The species had become a symbol of fear, almost like a ghost in the stars that everyone whispered about but no one had truly seen. Children grew up imagining monstrous beings lurking in distant galaxies, while adults avoided thinking about them too closely, fearing what it might mean for humanity's safety. Dr. Lena Hart, a dedicated exobiologist, had always been fascinated by these stories, not because she believed them, but because she wanted to find the truth. She had studied alien life her entire career and was convinced that fear alone should not decide humanity's view of another species. She knew that myths and rumors often became larger than life, especially in space where stories spread faster than people could verify them. When she was chosen to lead the first human expedition to the region of space where this infamous species lived, she felt a mixture of excitement and deep responsibility. This was not just a scientific mission, it was a chance to confront decades of fear and uncertainty and find out what was really happening. Lena's team was small but highly skilled. Each member had a specialty: communication, biology, psychology, and technology. They trained for months, preparing for every possible danger. They practiced survival scenarios, translation methods, and even ways to handle conflict if the species turned out to be hostile. Yet, despite all the preparation, everyone felt a tension in their hearts that could not be trained away. For years, humanity had imagined the worst, and the crew had no reason to doubt the terrifying reports. As their ship approached the outskirts of the species' territory, even seasoned astronauts could not help but feel a tight knot of anxiety. The journey through space was long and silent, broken only by the occasional check-in with mission control. Lena spent hours studying old reports and scanning the star maps for any anomalies. She noticed that many previous encounters had been based on incomplete data: blurry images, strange energy readings, and misinterpreted signals. She realized that much of humanity's fear came not from direct observation, but from assumptions and exaggerations. It made her more determined to approach the mission with an open mind. She wanted her team to remember that the universe was bigger than their fears and that the truth often differed from what people imagined. Despite Lena's reassurances, the crew could not entirely escape the shadow of the past. Even the ship's AI seemed to reflect the tension, often reminding them of potential hostile activity based on outdated data. Every small signal or unusual light made the team jump. Communication with the species had never been established before, so the possibility of misunderstanding or conflict was very real. Lena reminded her team repeatedly that patience, observation, and calm thinking would be their greatest tools. They were not there to fight. They were there to learn. When they finally neared the border of the alien system, the tension became almost unbearable. The stars stretched endlessly around them, but one particular planet drew their attention. It had been marked as the origin of most reports of attacks, though no one had ever been able to land or observe directly. Lena looked out at the planet's surface covered with clouds and sparkling oceans, and she felt a strange mix of awe and fear. For the first time, she realized that fear had prevented humanity from seeing this place for what it truly was. The planet, like the species, was unknown. And unknown things often seemed frightening until they were understood. The first scan of the planet revealed signs of intelligent life: cities, lights at night, and movement that suggested organized activity. It was different from the chaotic, war-torn visions that human stories had imagined. Lena and her team began preparing the landing procedure. They had to be careful, gentle, and respectful. This was uncharted territory, both literally and figuratively. Every step they took would shape the first real impression humanity would have of this species. As the landing began, Lena felt her heart race. She knew that first impressions mattered, not only for their safety, but for the story that would be told back home. If they approached with fear, that fear might color their reports and perpetuate old myths. She instructed her team to focus on observation, to take notes, and to respond calmly to any signal they received. As the ship touched the planet's surface, a hush fell over the crew. The ground beneath them was solid, surprisingly similar to Earth in texture, and the air, after careful analysis, was breathable. The moment that should have been tense with danger instead carried a strange calm. Then they saw them for the first time. Figures moved in the distance, not like monsters, but like beings going about their lives. They were taller than humans with unusual shapes and colors, but they did not appear aggressive. In fact, they paused and observed the humans with what seemed to be curiosity rather than hostility. Lena's breath caught. For the first time, she understood that the stories, terrifying as they were, might not match reality at all. She realized that everything humanity had assumed about this species was based on fear, not knowledge. As she led the team closer, she felt a mixture of caution and hope. This first encounter could change everything. Humanity might discover an enemy, or it might discover friends. The stories that had traveled across light years and terrified generations could finally be tested against reality. Lena's mind raced with possibilities. She knew that history was being written at that very moment, not in reports or rumors, but in real contact between two intelligent species. Every second mattered, every observation counted, and every gesture could shape the future. The crew stepped off the ship, their eyes wide with wonder and tension. For a species that had been called the most dangerous in the galaxy, these beings were calm, intelligent, and alive with energy and curiosity. Lena realized that fear had blinded humanity for too long, and now, standing on this alien world, she felt the first flicker of a new understanding. This mission, she thought, was not just about science. It was about truth, courage, and the chance to see the universe and its inhabitants without the lens of fear. Humanity was about to learn something it had never truly known, that sometimes the most infamous beings are far from what anyone imagined. The first moments of contact were tense, but as the humans stepped further onto the planet, they realized that the beings before them were not what they had feared. Their movements were calm, deliberate, and filled with curiosity. They had shapes and colors unfamiliar to human eyes, but their gestures were understandable. They pointed, moved slowly, and observed the humans with an intelligence that was unmistakable. For the first time, the crew felt a strange mix of relief and wonder. This was not a hostile species waiting to attack. They were living, thinking, beings curious about the newcomers from another world. Dr. Lena Hart led the cautious approach, reminding her team to maintain open gestures and slow movements. She remembered all the stories of fear and violence that humanity had passed down, but in front of her, none of it matched reality. The aliens were watching, studying, but not attacking. They had eyes, or something like eyes, that seemed to track movement and observe expression. Their heads tilted slightly as if trying to understand the human's strange appearance. Every movement seemed like a question, not a challenge. Lena felt a mixture of excitement and humility. The myths of the past were crumbling before her, eyes replaced by the calm truth of life in its purest form. Communication was the first challenge. The species had no language the humans could recognize, but they did use gestures, sounds, and changes in color on their skin that seemed meaningful. Lena's team had prepared for this with years of study in body language, signaling, and nonverbal communication. Slowly, the humans began to mirror the gestures, offering simple movements to show they came in peace. The aliens responded, repeating the gestures and adding subtle variations. It was not immediate understanding, but it was enough to break the ice. The species seemed delighted by the attempt to communicate. There were no weapons drawn, no threatening postures, only curiosity and careful observation. As the humans moved carefully through the area, they noticed signs of advanced civilization. Structures rose elegantly in the distance, unlike any human architecture. They were functional, beautiful, and clearly built for living rather than war. Gardens and water systems suggested a deep respect for nature, and pathways connected different, areas as if designed to bring beings together rather than separate them. Lena realized that the attacks reported by humanity might have been misinterpreted from a distance. Perhaps the species had systems to protect themselves or their environment that, when seen from afar, looked dangerous, but were simply part of their daily life. One of the team members, Alex Rivera, approached a small group of the aliens with a camera and scanner. He kept his movements slow, holding his hands visible to avoid sudden gestures that could be misunderstood. The aliens circled around him, examining the device with what seemed like curiosity. They touched it lightly, feeling its shape, and made soft, melodic sounds. Alex stepped back and mimicked their sounds, and the group paused, almost as if considering his attempt. It was the first real moment of exchange. Lena watched with pride and relief. For years, humans had feared that this species would react with immediate aggression, but instead, they were engaging in something far more sophisticated: interaction, observation, and learning. Over the next several hours, the humans and the aliens began a cautious, delicate dance of understanding. Each small gesture carried meaning: pointing to the sky to show location, holding hands in a circle to indicate cooperation, or mimicking movements to show friendly intent. Lena noticed subtle differences in how the aliens responded to each member of the crew. Some were more curious, others more cautious, but none showed signs of hostility. It became clear that this was a complex society, with its own rules, customs, and ways of evaluating new arrivals. Humanity had assumed they were simple predators, but in truth they were intelligent, thoughtful, and aware. The humans were also careful to respect boundaries. They stayed on open paths, avoided touching objects without permission, and always made sure their actions were visible and understandable. The aliens responded with patience, guiding the humans to areas where they could observe without interfering. Lena realized that this species valued order and mutual respect. They seemed to have a social system that rewarded caution, curiosity, and cooperation rather than aggression. It was a society built on understanding, not fear, and it challenged every preconceived notion humanity had held. During one encounter, an alien approached Lena directly. It did not speak, but extended a limb in a gesture that could only be interpreted as greeting. Lena hesitated for a moment, then extended her hand in return. The alien paused, tilted its head, and then mirrored her action perfectly. It was a simple, elegant exchange, yet it carried enormous meaning. It was the first personal connection, the first acknowledgement that these beings recognized humans not as invaders or monsters, but as potential partners in understanding. Lena felt a thrill she had never experienced in science before. This was the moment when fear began to dissolve, replaced by wonder and hope. As the day progressed, the humans observed the aliens' daily life. They saw beings working together to maintain the environment, communicating through complex gestures and sounds, and even creating art that was beyond human comprehension. There were children, elders, and adults, all interacting with care and patience. The species was not mindless or violent. They were organized, social, and intelligent. Lena documented everything with meticulous notes, aware that these observations would challenge decades of fear-driven narratives. Humanity's perception of this species was about to change forever. By evening, the humans and aliens had established a basic understanding. They could exchange simple ideas about location, movement, and curiosity. The species demonstrated technology that allowed them to share visual information without words, and the humans used it to show where they came from and what they wanted to learn. Both sides were cautious but open. Lena knew that trust could not be forced, but it could grow with patience, respect, and consistent behavior. The first day ended not with conflict or danger, but with hope. The infamous species that everyone had feared for generations was revealing a side no one had imagined: intelligent, social, and deeply curious. As the humans prepared to camp for the night, Lena reflected on what they had seen. The fear that had dominated humanity's imagination was based on assumptions, incomplete observations, and stories that had grown over time. In reality, the species was not a conqueror or a predator, but a complex civilization that valued life, communication, and learning. She felt a profound sense of responsibility. Their actions now would shape the relationship between humans and this species for generations to come. Every gesture, every word, and every observation mattered. For the first time, Lena allowed herself to imagine a future where humanity could coexist, learn, and even cooperate with these beings. It was a future built not on fear but on understanding. The first contact, which had started with anxiety and tension, ended with curiosity, respect, and the faint spark of friendship. The humans realized that the galaxy was far more complex than anyone had imagined, and that the species they had feared might become one of humanity's greatest allies. As days passed, Dr. Lena Hart and her team began to learn more about the species than they had ever imagined. Each interaction revealed new layers of intelligence, culture, and emotion. The beings were not simply curious. They were observant, reflective, and capable of understanding more than humans initially expected. The humans realized that much of what had been assumed about this species over decades of fear was based on incomplete or misunderstood information. Every small discovery added to the growing picture of a civilization far more sophisticated and peaceful than anyone had believed. The team soon discovered that the species had a complex system of communication that went beyond gestures and sounds. Subtle changes in skin color, slight shifts in posture, and specific rhythmic movements all conveyed meaning. It was intricate and precise, yet elegant, and it allowed the aliens to express emotion, ask questions, and share information quickly. Lena's team spent hours observing and mimicking these signals, slowly learning to recognize patterns. Even without fully understanding the language, they could grasp intentions. They began to realize that much of the fear humanity had felt, attacks, aggression, even reported invasions around, had been misunderstandings. From afar, defensive actions or territorial behavior may have seemed threatening, but up close they revealed a careful, rule-based society that valued boundaries and mutual respect. One day, Lena's team observed a ritual that left them stunned. The aliens gathered in a large circle, moving in synchronized patterns that combined movement, sound, and light changes on their skin. It was mesmerizing and beautiful, and it became clear that these rituals were not violent, but ceremonial and educational. The aliens seemed to be teaching younger members about their history, their principles, and the values of cooperation and understanding. Lena realized that the species' actions, once interpreted as aggressive, were often lessons in their own social code. Fear had made humans see monsters where none existed. During another observation, the team witnessed a form of governance. Groups of the species gathered to make decisions collectively. They shared ideas, listened carefully, and resolved conflicts through dialogue and ritualized negotiation. There was no evidence of the tyranny or cruelty humans had imagined. Instead, there was patience, respect, and a strong sense of responsibility toward the community and environment. Lena felt a deep respect for their intelligence. These beings had developed a civilization that was advanced not through conquest or violence, but through cooperation, discipline, and wisdom. It was a lesson that challenged everything the humans thought they knew about the galaxy. The humans also began to understand the species' approach to conflict and defense. Past attacks had likely been defensive measures against intruders or misunderstandings. The aliens were careful not to escalate situations unnecessarily and preferred observation over confrontation. Their technology was advanced, but it was used for protection, communication, and exploration rather than destruction. Lena realized that humanity's fear had grown because humans had projected their own tendencies toward aggression onto a species that operated under entirely different principles. The truth was far less frightening and far more impressive. One morning, an alien approached Lena herself, moving slowly and deliberately. It carried a small object in its limbs, placing it in front of her without a word. The object was a recording device of sorts containing images, sounds, and movements from the alien world. Lena watched as the alien used gestures and light patterns to indicate what the device was showing. She felt a sense of awe. They were willing to share knowledge directly, trusting the humans to understand and respect it. It was a remarkable display of communication, intelligence, and diplomacy. Lena realized that these beings had the ability to teach, to share, and to collaborate in ways that humans could only begin to imagine. The crew also began forming personal connections. One of the younger aliens, curious and playful, followed the team during their exploration. It mimicked movements, made soft sounds, and even reacted with what seemed like amusement when humans did something unexpected. The team laughed together, slowly shedding the tension that had marked their first days on the planet. For Lena, this was one of the most important lessons. Fear is often replaced with understanding when beings interact directly, when empathy replaces assumption, and when curiosity is allowed to flourish. Lena's observations confirmed that the species had a highly structured educational system. Young members were guided carefully by older ones, learning to interpret signals, understand history, and navigate social dynamics. Their society emphasized learning, respect, and responsibility. The humans saw firsthand that these beings were not violent conquerors, but a civilization deeply invested in knowledge, ethics, and community. Every story that had painted them as fearsome was now being rewritten in Lena's mind, replaced by evidence, observation, and understanding. The team also began documenting the species' technology. While far more advanced than human tools, it was used for practical, non-destructive purposes. Energy systems were clean and efficient, transport systems were smooth and safe, and communication devices were designed to share knowledge instantly across great distances. Lena realized that humanity's assumptions about power and weaponry had clouded its judgment. These beings had the ability to be destructive, yes, but they chose creation, cooperation, and learning over fear or violence. Their civilization thrived because of discipline, wisdom, and a shared vision of survival and progress. Over time, the humans and aliens established a fragile but growing understanding. The aliens seemed genuinely interested in learning about humans as much as humans were learning about them. They asked questions through gestures, observed reactions, and adjusted their behavior carefully. It became clear that the species valued reciprocity, mutual respect, and patience. Lena felt a profound sense of relief and excitement. Humanity had always feared the unknown, but now, standing on this planet, the unknown was showing its face, not as a monster, but as a teacher and a friend. By the end of the third week, Lena's team felt that the old narratives of fear had been completely overturned. They had spent enough time observing, learning, and interacting to understand that the species' reputation as ruthless or violent was a myth born of misunderstanding and exaggeration. They were intelligent, peaceful, ethical, and curious. Humanity's perception of the galaxy, and of this species in particular, was about to change in ways no one could have predicted. Lena realized that this mission was about far more than science. It was about challenging fear, questioning assumptions, and building bridges where none had existed before. The beings humanity had called the most infamous in the galaxy were revealing themselves to be far more remarkable than anyone had imagined. Through observation, patience, and respect, the humans had begun to see the truth. These were not enemies to fear, but partners in understanding, teachers of patience, and examples of intelligence and morality that stretched beyond human imagination. For the first time, Lena allowed herself to feel hope, not just for the mission but for the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. Perhaps this was only the beginning. If humans could learn from this species, and if fear could be replaced with understanding, the universe could become a place of discovery, cooperation, and shared knowledge. The species that had once been called the galaxy's most infamous had, in fact, become a symbol of wisdom, curiosity, and peaceful strength. Over the following weeks, the humans and the aliens began to develop a deeper understanding of each other. Daily interactions became more relaxed as the initial tension faded. The aliens demonstrated incredible curiosity about the humans' tools, gestures, and behavior, just as the humans remained fascinated by the alien culture, technology, and ways of thinking. It was a delicate process of exchange, where each side learned from the other while respecting boundaries and avoiding mistakes. Lena noticed that the more they observed, the more humans realized how little they truly knew about life in the galaxy. The aliens invited the humans into their communities in small, controlled steps. Paths led them to observation areas, classrooms, and communal gathering spaces. Each location offered a glimpse into the aliens' way of life. Humans were amazed to see young aliens learning through play, creating art, and interacting with elders in a calm, respectful manner. These interactions were not rigid or authoritarian. They were guided, patient, and full of care. The species had developed a way to nurture curiosity and intelligence from a young age, which explained why they had evolved into such advanced beings. Lena realized that humans had misjudged the species entirely. They were not dangerous conquerors, but a civilization committed to knowledge, ethics, and cooperation. The humans were particularly fascinated by the aliens' art and communication. They noticed that visual patterns, rhythmic sounds, and color changes could express emotion, ideas, and even abstract concepts. The aliens demonstrated these systems patiently, allowing humans to mimic, practice, and ask questions through gestures. Slowly, the humans learned how to convey simple messages, and in turn, they could share glimpses of their own world. This mutual teaching created trust, and the aliens seemed genuinely pleased with the humans' efforts. Lena realized that trust, built over shared understanding, was far stronger than any fear-driven assumption. During one memorable day, the humans observed a collaborative project. Aliens and humans worked together to assemble a device designed to study the planet's atmosphere. The aliens showed patience and precision, while the humans contributed their own experience and methods. Communication was mostly nonverbal, but the collaboration worked perfectly. Lena could see the amazement on her team members' faces. This species, long thought to be violent and merciless, was capable of cooperation, mentorship, and appreciation for learning. For Lena, this was a powerful reminder that fear often arises from misunderstanding, and that curiosity, empathy, and patience can replace it. As the humans spent more time on the planet, they noticed subtle social structures. The aliens appeared to have leaders, but leadership was not about domination or control. Decisions were made through discussion, observation, and consensus. Conflicts were resolved through rituals and dialogue, not force. The humans began to recognize the logic behind past incidents that had been reported as attacks. Defensive measures, misinterpreted gestures, and territorial boundaries had been described as aggression by distant observers. Up close, it was clear that this species had a code of ethics, valuing life and understanding above all else. Cultural exchange became an ongoing and fascinating part of the mission. The aliens introduced humans to their art, music, and storytelling. They explained history through visual and rhythmic narratives that humans had to observe and interpret carefully. In return, humans shared images, sounds, and stories of their own world. Laughter, wonder, and curiosity bridged the gap between species. Relationships grew beyond mere observation. Genuine friendships began to form. Humans began to see that these beings were capable of empathy, humor, and joy, qualities long thought impossible for a feared alien species. Technology became another point of fascination. The aliens demonstrated devices for communication, energy, management, and scientific observation. These tools were highly advanced but designed to create and preserve rather than destroy. Lena's team realized that humanity had long equated technological power with potential aggression, but this species had used intelligence for cooperation and sustainability. Every demonstration challenged human assumptions and encouraged the team to rethink their approach to exploration. Humanity had been preparing for war against monsters that did not exist, and this realization was both humbling and exhilarating. The bond between the humans and the aliens grew stronger with each passing day. Small gestures, sharing tools, exchanging signals, observing daily routines, built trust and deepened mutual respect. The humans began to understand not only the species' intelligence but their values: patience, collaboration, and a deep respect for life. Lena felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They were no longer just visitors. They were participants in a shared experience of learning, understanding, and connection. Fear had been replaced with curiosity, and curiosity had grown into admiration. By The end of the fourth week, Lena reflected on the journey so far. The species humanity had feared for generations had become teachers, collaborators, and friends. Humanity's assumptions were wrong, and the galaxy seemed far more complex and beautiful than previously imagined. This was not just an exploration mission. It was a profound lesson in empathy, understanding, and courage. The humans had learned that first impressions, based on fear and rumor, could never convey the truth. And as they continued their interactions, it became clear that this partnership could reshape humanity's future in the galaxy. The day ended with a ceremonial exchange. The aliens offered a symbolic gift, a carefully crafted object representing knowledge, peace, and cooperation. Lena accepted it with gratitude, understanding the deep significance. In that moment, the humans realized that the species' reputation, as the most infamous in the galaxy, was entirely undeserved. They were intelligent, ethical, and kind, qualities that humans had long failed to see. And for the first time, Lena allowed herself to imagine a future where humans and this species worked together, learned from each other, and built something greater than fear and misunderstanding could ever destroy. When the humans finally prepared to return to their own systems, the sense of achievement and discovery was overwhelming. Dr. Lena Hart and her team had spent weeks with a species humanity had feared for decades, and everything they had learned completely overturned old assumptions. The beings that had once been called the galaxy's most infamous were not monsters, but highly intelligent, ethical, and peaceful. The crew had seen firsthand how fear could distort perception, and how courage, patience, and observation could reveal the truth. The journey back was filled with reflection. Each team member replayed moments of interaction in their minds, the first cautious gestures, the shared laughter, the lessons learned about cooperation, and the bonds formed with a civilization once thought hostile. Lena knew that when they reported back, it would not just be a scientific report. It would be a story of discovery, understanding, and hope. Humanity's perception of the species, and perhaps the galaxy itself, was about to change forever. As they approached human-controlled space, Lena prepared her team for the challenges ahead. Governments and citizens had long believed in the species' danger. Reports of attacks, disappearances, and destruction had filled books, broadcasts, and educational materials. Convincing the world that the truth was far different would not be simple. Yet Lena felt certain that evidence, careful observation, and first-hand experience could begin to shift perspectives. The key would be patience, clarity, and transparency. When the team finally made contact with Earth authorities, the initial reaction was skepticism. Officials questioned the findings, asking how a species so feared could actually be peaceful. Lena and her team presented their observations, documentation, and recordings of interactions. They showed how the species communicated, how their society functioned, and how technology was used for creation and protection rather than aggression. Slowly, skepticism began to give way to curiosity, and curiosity to belief. Humanity had long feared monsters in the dark reaches of the galaxy, but now the evidence proved otherwise. As public awareness grew, stories of fear were replaced with stories of wonder. Media outlets reported not attacks but collaboration. Scientists discussed the species' advanced education, ethics, and technology. Students learned about empathy, observation, and the value of questioning assumptions. Lena realized that the mission's impact was far larger than any one discovery. It had become a lesson for all of humanity. Fear often grows from ignorance, and understanding requires courage, patience, and openness. Over the following months, cultural exchange programs began. Humans shared knowledge about their own history, technology, and environment, while learning more about the alien species' art, science, and ethics. Relationships formed between individuals, fostering trust and cooperation across species. Space agencies collaborated on research, and scientists found inspiration in the aliens' approach to learning, society, and sustainability. Lena felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Humanity had not just met a species, they had discovered allies, teachers, and friends. The most profound lesson was perhaps personal. Lena reflected on the fear she had carried before the mission, the tension of the first landing and the stories that had filled her childhood. All of that fear had been replaced by understanding, empathy, and respect. Humanity had projected its own assumptions onto a species that operated under entirely different principles, but direct contact had changed everything. The galaxy was larger, richer, and more complex than anyone had imagined, and this species, once called the most infamous, had become a symbol of the value of curiosity and courage. In the years that followed, Lena's work became foundational for interstellar diplomacy. Humans and aliens collaborated on science, art, and culture. Young generations learned not to fear the unknown, but to seek it out, study it, and understand it. The species once feared for its supposed ruthlessness became a partner in exploration, a teacher of ethics, and a friend to humanity. Lena often thought back to the first day on the planet, remembering the mix of tension and awe. It seemed impossible then that fear could transform into respect so completely, but that is exactly what had happened. The galaxy had learned a powerful lesson. Assumptions, stories, and fear can never replace first-hand understanding. What had been called the most infamous species was, in reality, an example of intelligence, morality, and peaceful cooperation. Humanity had changed, the species had changed, and the universe had grown just a little more connected. For Lena and her team, the mission had been about science, but it had become about something greater: hope, understanding, and the courage to face the unknown with an open heart. By the end of it all, humans no longer saw the species as monsters. They saw allies, teachers, and companions. The myths of fear had been replaced with truth, and in that truth, humanity discovered a new way to navigate the galaxy, one guided not by terror, but by empathy, observation, and the simple, profound act of looking beyond appearances.